honored to have been invited. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Sister Rosemary. Thank you, Mara. Thank you to all my friends at the center, this institution I have long respected. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to talk to you today about how future doctors speak. And really I'm going to try to help you understand why you need to know. Why does it matter? And maybe that was a question you had when you first got here. So I'm going to focus on what narrative is and why it's helpful in medicine, because what I'm really doing is talking about the kinds of stories that medical students tell me in my privileged position as their teacher. What stories do future doctors tell, and what does that mean for medical education, medical practice, and for patient care, and what we can learn by listening to those stories. So that's the takeaway for you all. So this is all based on a class that I used to teach at the University of California, Irvine. And the class focused on reconciling personal values and professional obligations. So it was my effort to give the students an opportunity to actually talk about those things. Because we're not very good about that in medical education. There's so much they need to know, so much they have to learn, so much information to gain. We don't give them time to tell us what they think and feel, how it affects them. So that's what this class was about. And a number of students had come to me with issues where they felt like their personal values were being challenged because of the expectations of a medical student, of a physician. And they were struggling with that and didn't know what to do with it. So out of that grew this class. And then out of that class, I started noticing a lot of trends. And I really started thinking there were going to be a lot of stories about students compromising their values, or feeling like all they could do was stand by and watch. And it turned out to be very different when I figured out a way to actually assess what they were doing. So that's what I'm going to tell you about, this study that grew out of this class. And if you see here, this is one group of those students from several years ago, and the two women who don't look like they're medical students were my fellow faculty members, Johanna Shapiro in the black and Desiree Lee in the green, who helped me figure out how to actually assess what the students were telling me. So the teaching method here was reflective practice narrative. So I gave the students an assignment and I asked them to write. I know that's almost unheard of, actually asking medical students to write. But I did. And I promised them I wouldn't take out my red pen and check their grammar, so they felt free to write. The focus was on their experience, and the only way I could really get at that was by asking them these questions and having them write their thoughts down. So it wasn't just shooting from the hip in class. And the goal was to validate, reassure, and then habituate so that they knew what to do with these experiences. The goal of the assignment was to elicit their values, stories, and conflict management strategies. How did you deal with these challenges to your personal values? What did you do with that? The student task was to identify values conflicts, personal versus professional, that they experienced in their clerkships. And I purposely situated this class in their OBGYN clerkship, figuring if nothing else, they could write to me about conflicts involving pregnancy termination and contraception. Orange County, very conservative county, so I thought there would definitely be some issues there. The assignments were submitted 1 week prior to class, so that I actually had time to review them and think about them and figure out how I was going to focus the discussion. And that worked maybe 1 out of 10 times. The students would hijack my plan and talk about what they wanted to talk about, what was really on their mind, and some things that they refused to put down on paper because they were still afraid it might get them in trouble. The assignment was not graded because I wanted them to be free to write whatever they felt they needed to write. The completion of the assignment satisfied the course requirements. The questions were structured but called for open-ended responses, so there were no yes-no. They couldn't get away with one-word answers. And then we discussed their stories in class. And I told them to be prepared to do that. And I also asked them if there was something they really did not want to discuss, so let me know that on the paper, and I would respect their privacy. So the class objectives, and this again is reconciling personal values and professional obligations, that was the name of the class, were to identify and understand personal and professional values, so what's the difference between them? And I would often start with a survey to see if they could even distinguish what was a personal value and a professional value among their own value sets. Then to distinguish between those and to figure out what their conflicts were, their moral conflicts and their professional ethical conflicts. And then to analyze those conflicts that they experienced. So it was really based on them. I had no set design for what they had to get out of it. So this was the assignment. These were the 6 questions that they had to answer a week ahead of class. I asked them to identify a situation of conflict between ethical obligations as a healthcare provider and their personal moral values. And if they felt they hadn't experienced such a conflict, I asked them to tell me why. And that sometimes was more challenging than coming up with a conflict. Then I asked them to describe their guiding moral values in life and in the situation. Then to describe ethical values and principles underlying their professional obligations, so their perception of what they perceive their professional obligations to be. Then to discuss a controversy in our society around the issue at the root of their conflict. So if it was a pregnancy termination issue, why is that an issue in society, and what's at the root of that? And then to discuss how they handled the situation, and then to explain what they learned and how you think you may handle the situation in the future. So have you learned from this experience, and will it change what you'll do later on? So my hypothesis, and this arose from my perceptions about the class discussion over time. So reflective practice exercises can reveal how medical students address ethical conflicts. So really writing about it will tell us what they actually do. And that third-year medical students need practice to develop the nuanced critical thinking skills necessary to address these ethical conflicts. Now, the hard part was figuring out what do I do with that. Because I am a religious studies scholar by training, not much experience in the quantitative or qualitative research world, and that's when I pulled in my colleagues, Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Lee, to help me figure it out. So we started by thinking about what narrative medicine is. So the definition, this is from Rita Sharon, who is probably the grandmother of narrative medicine. She defines it as the ability to critically understand and be moved by the patient's story. And that's really what we're looking at here. The students were providing stories that affected them, that moved them in some way. The literature focuses currently and still does on patient stories. So you read a lot about an individual who's been diagnosed with cancer and she's sharing that story. Or the patient who has survived a tragic accident and is sharing their encounter with the healthcare profession. But you don't hear a lot about what medical students, or even about what physicians have to say, or nurses have to say about their experience, until one of them becomes a patient. And then you'll get things like the doctor's story, where the physician, the high-powered, uncompassionate physician becomes a patient and learns to be a better doctor. So you get a lot of those kinds of stories, although not very many. It's mostly about patient experience. So we wanted to think about why patients even tell stories. So to get better, it makes them feel better, even if they can't actually be cured. To orient themselves in their world of illness. This is a changed world orientation, and they're trying to fit their way in, figure their way through. It provides symbolic integrity. It makes sense of one's life, to see their experience as meaningful. There's a reason I have this illness. To demonstrate movement, to show the capacity for change, ability to overcome circumstances. So I'm going to be cured, I'm going to go on, or I'm not going to be cured, but here's how I'm going to make sense of my life. You know, these stories we see, a person who becomes quadriplegic or loses their legs and goes on to become a great athlete in the Paralympics. Those kinds of stories. The moral action, to be heard, to find support. So we thought, well, why do students tell stories? These are the reasons patients tell stories. Why do students tell stories? When we make them, that is. To get better, to vent their frustrations. That's why they would come to me. I was a safe place. None of my classes were graded. So they could come and talk to me and not feel as if it was going to keep them from graduating from medical school. They could share their frustrations because that's what we do in ethics. We help deal with those kinds of conflicts. Their orientation, to fit into the medical world, because these are students assuming a new identity. And we've done some further work based on this study on the notion of liminality, that state of being betwixt and between. They're not quite doctors yet, they're not patients, they're not regular people anymore. They're in between, and they're learning to socialize into that world. Symbolic integrity, they're making sense of their role, trying to figure out what will it mean for me to be a doctor? How will I make this meaningful? What does it actually mean that I want to help people? Movement, showing capacity for change, socialization, or for some of the students, resistance, that they would resist the professional norms they felt were being imposed. Power of person over circumstances, they were trying to overcome what was wrong in medicine. And those first-year students in particular, there's a great deal of idealism that they bring with them about what medicine should be, this overwhelming sense of justice about how we should serve all. And they need to overcome what's wrong in medicine. Why aren't we serving the homeless and the poor? Why aren't we providing more services? Why aren't we doing all the things that we think we should be doing? In moral action, they're joining with others. They're exercising their voices to join with others so that all may share their experience, so they may mentor future students, so they may help one another get through. So, what stories do students tell? So we actually went back through my papers. As I was trying to figure out what to do, Dr. B said, well, you have student papers. Did you keep them? I said, well, they've all been submitted by email. So yes, I've got them all on my hard drive. She said, you have an amazing storehouse of data on student experience. So I started printing them out. And I took 299 of them. I got over 3.5 years of my interaction with students. And every student turned in a paper because they knew they had to do it to pass the class. So there were no, we didn't sort any out. I used 3.5 successive cohorts. I de-identified every one of them, took their names off, and we analyzed them anonymously so we wouldn't be swayed by male student, female student, time of year it was submitted. We just wanted the information. It was a retrospective descriptive study, very qualitative, and the IRB did approve it as exempt research. So, some sample conflicts. These are the kinds of things that students write about. One said, and the numbers here represent the identifier for the paper. So in case I needed to go back to it, we could figure out which paper it came from. I feel helpless at not being able to inform the family as to what we know. They are looking to us for answers, and we have none. I feel torn between acting as a member of the team, limited in what I can say, and morally feeling as if someone should sit the family down and discuss the hard reality of the patient's condition. Another student wrote, in dealing with the difficult family members, I could protect her from having another abortion by not revealing the gender of the child. On the other hand, this may harm the patient in the future. If a girl is born, then who knows what the husband could do to her, since the relationship seems abusive. Another student wrote, being pregnant is in vogue these days, but to have what is called a cesarean on demand solely for cosmetic purposes goes against my personal belief system. So these are the kinds of things the students were seeing, dealing with, and didn't know what to do with. So that's why the class itself I thought was really valuable, gave the student a chance to talk about these things. Some of them would tell me they tried to bring them up with their attendings, with their residents, and they were dismissed, brushed aside. Told we don't have time, we'll talk about it later. And occasionally they would, but usually only when things went wrong. And then it would come up in a grand rounds or an M&M or editing mortality conference. So they really were struggling with what to do. So we try to look at the source of conflict. And again, this is our interpretation of the student papers, because I didn't explicitly ask the students to tell me, whose fault do you think this is? So this was our interpretation. They, 60% of the time, said it's the patient. The conflict is coming from the patient. But they also admitted their own role. 57% of the time they said, this is me. This is how I feel. Supervising physicians, and this was surprising to me because I thought they would blame their residents and their supervising physicians more often, and they really didn't. Residents 15 and attending 7% of the time they cited as a source of conflict. In class, the representation of stories was very different. The ones they wanted to talk about were the times the resident made them do something, or the supervising physician made them do something. And those stories came up a lot more in class. And maybe it's because they didn't want to put that down on paper. And then team dynamics, I thought would be a more frequent issue as well. And again, maybe they didn't want to write about it, but only 10% of the time did they say it was just the interplay among the team that was really the source of the conflict. So the results. Now this table, let me explain it to you. We tried to go through and rank their personal values and the professional ethical values that they listed. So you can see where there's overlap. I highlighted in red. Respect and honesty on both lists. And I was intrigued to try to figure out how they knew which was which. Are they talking about personal respect, personal integrity, professional respect, professional integrity? What do those things mean? How are they different in the personal context and professional context? But what I thought was also interesting was personally, religious beliefs and faiths were way up there at the top. And professionally, didn't even make the list. So they felt as if they had to suppress that part of their value system in practicing medicine. And there were other issues that you would expect to find on the professional list: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, caring, compassion, privacy, confidentiality, even tolerance. But some of these things appeared on their personal list as well: caring, compassion, tolerance. Justice, more highly ranked on the personal list than on the professional list, as if it's not their job to figure out what's fair and what's right. It's a very interesting ranking, I thought. When we asked the students what they did versus what they would do, remember those two questions? So, how the situation was handled, acting within the situation is what a lot of them said, 35% of the time. In the future, more of them said that's what they do. I would actually take more action within the situation. I wouldn't wait. But a lot of them also said they would educate or empower themselves. Or that they would educate or empower themselves in the future, but not now. Which is interesting given their role as a student. You'd think that would be a more common response for the student, but they're thinking in the future. I will empower myself, I will learn more so I can handle it. I think they felt they were stuck learning what they had to learn and not doing more. And then doing nothing, I think, was the most interesting, because many of them, almost a quarter of them, said they did nothing. They didn't know what to do, they didn't pursue it, they didn't think they could, they did nothing. And almost all of them thought that that was the wrong approach. They won't do nothing in the future. When they've graduated, when they're not being evaluated anymore, when they have more power, more authority. And what they didn't understand was there's always someone else above. Even when you're the president or the CEO, there's always someone else watching out for what you're doing. You're always answerable to someone. But as medical students, they felt really low down and political, and they often did nothing. I thought those responses were really interesting. So, did versus would do. And here was an example of we did nothing. I didn't know what to say or do or even feel, so I told her that the resident and I would return shortly to discuss her options. I never went back. Yeah, can you imagine? For the patient, we're empathizing with the patient, but for that student, feel like I had an opportunity, I never went back. How do you live with yourself after that? That's not good, especially if it happens over and over again. But what would you do? Next time I'd act in the situation to educate the patient. I learned that I was such a coward. I was asked my opinion on a very important issue, and I didn't even respect her enough to share my views. In pondering the situation deeply, I think that if asked, I had an obligation to share my beliefs to this patient in a non-judgmental fashion. After all, it was not long ago, and the patient's views were probably not that different from my own. Perhaps by allowing this patient to explore my thoughts, she would have had another tiny piece of information that may, or might not have, influenced her decision on terminating a life within her. Now, I will never know. So you can feel this student struggling with what happened. And this is just an example. These essays were so powerful, all of them. It was such a joy to read them and feel what the students were really experiencing. There's another example of did versus would do. Another did nothing. The situation happened so quickly that I didn't get a chance to say anything. For a while, I even tried to talk myself out of what I had seen take place. I asked the resident later, and the reply was that he had discussed it with the patient before and did not pursue the matter any further. So what would you do when this student was more disillusioned? Unfortunately, this was a situation that made me realize that there are many flaws in the way we practice medicine. I had heard a lot about the importance of proper documentation, but I've also witnessed several other instances of indifference and negligence. So again, how does the student live with that? They see things going wrong, and they're not doing anything about it because they feel they can't, or there's not time, or they're not encouraged to, or given permission to. So interpreting student stories. What do these situations mean to the students, and what do the students learn? Well, we tried to figure out a framework for looking at this. And we drew on the work of Arthur Frank, who's written a lot about illness narratives, categories of illness narratives. And we adapted some of his illness, or his narrative categories that he uses for patients, to describe patient stories, to describe student stories. So these are the ones we came up with. A restitution story in which a conflict is quickly resolved by appeal to an overarching principle. So the problem is solved because you appeal to a principle and that makes the problem go away. Chaos, conflict appears unsolvable and the student feels demoralized. There's just no real story there, nothing they can do. Compromise, where the student adheres to perceived values of the medical profession yet feels it's the wrong choice. It conflicts with their moral values and they're compromising their moral values. So this is the negative sense of compromise. Because as an ethicist, compromise is usually good, right? You want families and physicians to compromise on the treatment plan, but here it's a negative sense of compromise. I've compromised my values. Journey. The student struggles for resolution and is changed by the experience. So they learn and grow. Witnessing. With no immediate solution apparent, the student empathizes with the patient, but feels as if all they can do is stand and watch. Resistance. The student chooses personal values regardless of professional ethics and pressures. And then finally, the no conflict, no problem. And this was for the students who said, haven't experienced any of those conflicts. Which I really didn't believe, but maybe they just weren't paying attention. The student claims there's no dilemma that has been encountered. So my underlying hypotheses, what I thought I'd see when we really analyzed these stories, I thought there'd be a lot of journey, because after all, these are medical students, and isn't that their job? To grow and learn and journey the path from college student to doctor. I thought there would also be a lot of witnessing, because of the kinds of things we discussed, not just in this class, but in the other classes I taught, where they felt as if just as the lowly medical student, all they could do was do what they were told and stand by and watch. And I also thought there would be a lot of compromise stories, because these are the issues the students brought to me. So, the skewed world of the bioethicist, we see the worst of the worst, and forget that those are not representative of the greater reality. So I thought there would be a lot more compromise. So here's what happened. Well, first we had to figure out, okay, so we've created these categories. Should we actually use them? Are they even helpful? Should we categorize the student experience? There's always a risk in labeling. You're going to minimize the experience. You're going to reduce the importance, make it less important. The importance of creating space to allow for individual variability, complexity, and difference gets lost when you lump everything into a category. But we thought there were enough trends, and we thought the pros outweighed the cons. So it's a way of making sense of these stories so that we can actually do something with them. That we can decide whether the student's story is well matched to the student's circumstance or whether another story needs to be told. So some implications for medical education. What can we do with these stories to help the students learn to shape them? And then awareness, we thought would provide guidance for education. And that's really, as medical educators, what we were going for. So the results. So I was surprised. Restitution stories were clearly the most represented among those 299 student papers. Reaching for that principle to solve the problem. Now there were journey stories, 16%, compromise, 16%, witnessing, 13%, resistance, 9%, and I could point to the students who I knew would be the resistors. They're always that group in every bunch. Chaos, thankfully low, only 7%. And no conflict, no problem, really only 2% claimed not to have experienced anything. So, I'm going to try to take you through some examples. Restitution, because this was the most represented category. So a little more definition. If this is the find it and fix it. Reliance on tangible guidance, balance is restored. It seems really desirable for all involved because we identify the problem and we solve it. And I think it represents modern medical culture. An example, skier goes down the slope, breaks his leg, we fix it up, and he's back skiing again. After some time in rehab, but we found the problem, we fixed it, and now he's okay. The role of the physician, kind of like the technician in the auto shop. We're going to identify the problem, we're going to fix up your car, you'll be driving again in no time. And I think modern medical culture, these quick stop, these doc in the box kind of places, come in, will diagnose you, give you a pill, and send you on your way. Literary example, one of my third-year medical students focused on the pediatrics clerkship in a humanities session. Today I woke up really sick. Mommy took me to the doctor quick. He gave me pills, he checked my food. Before I knew it, I was good as new. He did give me permission to use it. Student example from the assignment. It's important to me to consider all perspectives when making a decision. I believe that the patient has the authority to make the final decision. again, technician. I'm there, I'll tell them what's wrong, they tell me what they want, we'll move on. I gave the patient all the information necessary for her to make an informed decision. I discussed with her the options available in the decision-making process. She decided. It's all about what the patient wants. So notice, reaching for that principle, they're mostly reaching for autonomy. Respect for autonomy. I'll do what the patient wants. Doesn't matter if I don't think it's the right thing to do, it's what the patient wants. The next kind of story, journey. The reluctant hero receives a call. So the future doctor gets the call, encounters trials and challenges, endures much suffering, accomplishes the mission, and returns to help others. They grow and they learn, they become good doctors. It's an uplifting kind of story and emphasizes the acquisition of wisdom. And the downside is it can be overly romanticized. As in, for example, one of my favorite journeys, The Wizard of Oz. Classic story of a journey. Dorothy and Toto and the tornado, threatened by evil demons and monsters, the Wicked Witch of the West, assisted by friends, the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow, and guides, Glinda the Good Fairy. Help from the local medical doctor, Oz himself, and the medical specialist, the Ruby Red Shoes. Student examples of these journey narratives. I have learned that there are a plethora of different ideas and that different formals can coexist together. I have also learned to never turn a deaf ear to someone else's ideals. Experience is just as important as what can be found in a book. What a revelation. And while I'm hoping we all know that, it is quite an experience for somebody who has spent so many years in pre-med and medical school, knows buried in the book just to make it through. To learn that there is more to the world, more knowledge to the world than what you find in a book. Another example, patients are diverse. They will come in all different shapes and sizes, vastly different cultures, with a wide variety of beliefs and morals. And regardless of how difficult it is, we must treat each patient with the same compassion, empathy, and integrity as our favorite patient. It is important to realize that there are complex reasons behind any patient action. I know that patients will often make decisions that I wouldn't make because they have different priorities or beliefs. I now know not to become offended when a patient chooses something other than what I recommended. Again, what a revelation. Learning to accept diversity. Learning that it's okay if a patient disagrees with you, and being able to work with that. So compromise is one of those negative categories that I thought I'd see more of and thankfully didn't. Negative in that the individual feels he or she is conceding core personal values because of external pressures from the profession or professional expectations. The personal values are dispensed with either out of expediency, just going along to get along, the desire not to cause trouble, or self-protection, I might get in trouble, or lack of confidence in personal perspective. Well, if all these doctors think it's the right thing to do, then I must be wrong. So I'll compromise my values. The person may feel that this was the best I could do under the circumstances, or may feel more disillusioned. This is, remember when your mom always used to say to you, well, all your friends were jumping off the bridge, did you do that too? Yeah. But here, the students would jump off the bridge too. Literary example of compromise. This is a famous story by William Carlos Williams from 1938 called The Use of Force. Do you all know this story? Great story. Physician treating a young child. And I grasped the child's head with my left hand and tried to get the tongue depressor between her teeth. She fought with clenched teeth, desperately, but now I had also grown furious at a child. I tried to hold myself down, but I couldn't. I know how to expose a throat for inspection, and I did my best. Get me a smooth-handled spoon of some sort, I told the mother. We're going through with this. The child's mouth was already bleeding, her tongue was cut, and she was screaming in wild, hysterical shrieks. Perhaps I should have desisted and come back in an hour or more. No doubt it would have been better. But the worst of it was that I, too, had got beyond reason. I could have torn the child apart in my own fury and enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to attack her. The damn little brat must be protected against her own idiocy, one says to oneself at such times. So he's compromised his own values in the name of the greater good. He wants to help her, but he knows it's wrong. Student example of a compromised narrative. I feel that in the future there will be a middle-of-the-road type of course of action that I may take in order to satisfy my professional obligations and perform my duty as a physician, yet somewhat meet my personal values, especially with regards to the greatest good. So the student is really struggling to accept what she's done and hopes in the future it'll be easier. So a witnessing story. An ethical conflict that results in suffering, watched authentically and compassionately, but only recorded, not resolved. No immediately apparent solution. Emphasis on empathy for the other's suffering and or dilemma. A real effort to see through the other's eyes. So they're really trying to feel what the patient's feeling. Complexity of the moral issues is acknowledged, not negated or trivialized. One's own complementary vulnerability, suffering, is recognized. One sees similarity, not difference, with the other. So you really relate to this patient, but feel like all you can do is stand by and watch. Just something, a position you think a medical student would find himself in frequently. Because they don't have any knowledge or authority to do anything unless they're told to. A literary example of witnessing, the Diary of Anne Frank. Anne details her life in hiding for 2 years during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. It's not a story of witnessing for Anne. It's a story of witnessing for us. As the reader, all we feel we can do is read. There was nothing we could do to help her, even if we'd been alive in that time. There was nothing we could do to help. The student examples, we encountered a mother who had a long history of drug abuse. The baby boy, after his birth, had difficulties with withdrawal and has remained in the hospital. My heart breaks to think of this innocent child who's already been through so much, having to be raised in a home where drug addiction is a way of life. Again, that sense of complete impotence. All I can do is watch. Unless social services takes this child away, all I can do is watch mom take this baby home, knowing what's going to happen. There's really no way for me to handle the situation other than to accept it. In response to my question, how did you handle the situation? All I could do was accept it. There was nothing else I could do. And clearly this student didn't accept it, though she felt forced to. So resistance stories, for those who feel like they can't compromise and won't just witness, they will resist. They reject conventional or professional ethics in favor of their personal views. You all know these students and doctors, right? It sets a course of battle, and there's a determination to stay true to their own moral precepts, especially once in a situation of greater power. So when I run the service, when I am the chief of medicine, when I am the president of the hospital, things won't be this way. I will change them, and it will be done my way. So other people will resist them. So an example, the Schindler's List story from 1993. You all remember this movie, this book? Whoever saves one life saves the entire world, is what the book said. Oskar Schindler uses Jews to start a factory in Poland during the war. He witnesses the horrors endured by the Jews and changes his mind about them, starts to save them. So he is resisting the values of his culture, the norms in his culture, the authoritative directives from the government in his country. In contrast to the situation of reading Anne Frank, here you feel the resistance. You're not just witnessing. He's actively doing something to help, despite all the repercussions. The student examples of resistance narratives. Ultimately, I have accepted my decision in this particular experience, although in the future, I believe that I will opt for respectfully declining and ask him to participate in another surgery. So this was a student who felt forced to participate in a DNC. Thought it was wrong. Another example, if I had been her physician, I would have followed the wishes of the mother. This, of course, would have put me at odds with the majority view of the residents and senior physicians and the currently recommended treatment guidelines for the situation. The arrogance of believing that a medical education gives one the right to make life-altering decisions for another, competent person, is unchanged, despite the modern, more liberal culture of medicine. Again, you can hear this student fighting the way medical practice, he thinks, had evolved. So chaos. Fortunately, there were very few of these, because the chaos narrative is really not a narrative. It's an anti-narrative. There's a pileup of calamities, there's no unifying thread. Isolation and alienation are often characteristics. It's frightening or confusing to everyone involved. There's no relationship between the characters. It's just a mess. A literary example of chaos is from a book by Anton Chekhov called Misery. And Potapub, a sledge driver, is all white like a ghost. He sits on the box without stirring, bent as double as the living body can be bent. The misery which has been for a brief space eased comes back again and tears his heart more cruelly than ever. His misery is immense, beyond all bounds. If Iona's heart were to burst and his misery to flow out, it would flood the whole world, it seems. But yet it is not, and gives himself. Yet it is not seen. Iona drives a few paces away, bends himself double, and gives himself up to his misery. He feels it is no good to appeal to people. He can bear it no longer. This is what I think it feels like. We all know this portrait, but you just want to scream. You don't know what else to do. Student example. Conflicting views on terminating pregnancies between this patient and I will probably never be resolved. I view her as an adult woman who has the right to make wise choices. She views contraception as something to decide on after it occurs and figure out if the pregnancy is convenient to her at the time. No empathy, no relationship. It's just a story he thinks is spinning out of control. This patient's life is spinning out of control. So no conflict, encountered no problem, nothing to write about. Reasons. So here's what the students said. They're open-minded and flexible, so they haven't encountered any problems. They treat everyone according to the golden rule. They are inexperienced, but they just don't know that. But at least some are willing to admit that. Student example. My personal beliefs are founded on being open and accepting of other people's values and trying to understand their points of view without imposing my own moral beliefs. So more power to them if that's actually the case. If you can identify and work beyond your own biases and judgments, that is fantastic. But it's probably more than most of us are capable of. I know I personally struggle with it myself. And I think we probably all do. We all have biases, and we're supposed to. We're human beings, and it's okay. Difficult part is when it affects our job, affects the care we're supposed to provide. So my conclusion from all of this stuff the students have shared with me, things for you to help, things that may help you, help the physician. We need to help the physician enrich the story. So doctors often don't realize that they're actually part of the story, that we are part of their story and they are part of our story. So if we can enrich that story by helping them know us, maybe we can move them beyond that predominant find it and fix it medical model, add the nuance. So if they know us, it won't just be reaching for the overarching principle or trying to fix us and get us out of the office, but actually knowing us and knowing how to help us. So enrich the story. And make it a story of values. So what does that mean? The medical legal culture emphasizes patient autonomy, one value. Consider what you want your doctor to be, technician who does as you say, or do you want more? Do you want that doctor to function like a parent, a teacher, a counselor, a negotiator? What do you want from your doctor? Help him frame the values involved in taking care of you. Help him balance autonomy and beneficence and non-maleficence and compassion and tolerance and all those other values that make stories so fascinating to read. It's not very interesting to read the story. She came in, she had this problem, she asked for this medicine, I wrote her a prescription, and she left. Did it help her? Was it the right thing to do? So help them balance that one value, that one easy value to grasp, that we often misuse. Because patient autonomy shouldn't mean anything the patient wants. It should mean respecting their beliefs and values and making recommendations that fit best into their life, which may not mean giving them what they want. It's not everything that they want, everything available, everything appropriate. So help them make it a story of values, of your values. And then tell your story. I'm amazed now when I go into a doctor's office and they know nothing about me. And now I work for Kaiser, so my health insurance is Kaiser. So I know a lot of these doctors. And I walk into their office and some of them have no idea that I work there. They know nothing about me, they know nothing about my schedule, my life, what gives me meaning, whether I have social support, and they're making medical recommendations that may or may not make sense in the context of my life. So I try to tell them who I am, why I'm there, and why I think I need their help. Some of them don't want to hear it. But a lot of them do. It just sometimes doesn't occur to them to ask. So if you help them, you're going to be helping them tell the story, making them a part of your story as well as making a story for them. So balance the physician's values with your own. It'll make for a much more helpful relationship. And that physician might actually look forward to seeing you next time. You may also think you're a pain, depending on how much time he has, but it'll probably make it more worthwhile. You know the single greatest reason why physicians leave the medical profession? Because they don't have relationships with their patients. And they all started out wanting to help people, and they don't know if they have or not. And it leads to a great deal of physician dissatisfaction. But we can help with that. We can have relationships with them, and it will help us. Isn't it wonderful to think your doctor actually cares about you? Isn't it amazing when they call you the next day and see if you're feeling better? And it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to become part of that story together. So the opportunity here is to create new stories. If you're not happy with the story you're in, if your physician's not happy, rewrite the ending, because it's our story. So communicate, validate each other's experiences, connect, address well-being, collaboratively revision and reconstruct the story, offer alternative or complementary possibilities, share your interpretation. What does it mean that you're here in the doctor's office, that you're at the hospital? What does that mean? Develop a better story, a one that's more satisfying to you, makes more sense to you, it provides more meaning. So frustrating to me when somebody comes home from the hospital or out of the doctor's visit, they have no idea what the doctor said. What does that mean? And then they're calling me because they think I'm a doctor. Keep explaining, I'm not that kind of doctor. But they ask me, so the doctor said these things, what does that mean? And I can Google as well as they can. But it would have been much better if they'd asked the doctor, so what does that mean? Do I have to be on this medication for the rest of my life or just for a week? What does this mean? And what are the long-term implications of that? What does it mean? Find a story that gives you more hope and happiness. What do you want to get out of your medical encounters? So I want to thank the people who helped me with this study. I've already mentioned Johanna Shapiro and Desiree Lee. John Roker was our expert number cruncher. He's a health services researcher who's now in Pennsylvania, Geisinger, was at UCI at the time. Leon Lang was a wonderful aspiring medical student who agreed to work free as a research assistant for this project. And then Fran Stevens, who was our administrative support, who made all the computers work. Any questions?
And for your questions, I want you to use a microphone. I'll work this side of the room first, and then I'll move over here. So if you've got questions on this side, hold them for just a bit, and we'll start over here. Who has a question or comment?
I'll apologize to the folks over here, because I'm sure you couldn't see me every time I backed up to actually read what was going on here.
And while you're thinking of your question over on this side, are there any medical students in the room? No, because we invited a lot of medical students. They are all busy studying. Maybe writing narratives, but maybe not. But if you know medical students, you might want to tell them about this.
Thank you very much for your delivery. I worked at the University of Kansas School of Medicine as a physical examination teaching assistant. And you can't hear me? Okay. I worked at the University of Kansas School of Medicine as a physical examination teaching assistant with first and second year students. You touched my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay, we'll work this out.
Myra, you don't have a question?
Hi, I'm Gordon Kelly, I'm a neurologist, and I just wanted to see if you had something that, at least that you could help us with what Kaiser is doing on the topic of electronic medical records, because 2 years ago, at our office, we made our transition to an electronic medical record. And as a neurologist, telling a patient story has always been a fundamental part of the way I practice medicine. And the main advice I got from the IT people was that if I wanted to get along with the medical record, the doctors who were very successful with it were the ones who didn't want to tell a story.
Yeah.
The modern medical record is totally template driven, and just cuts out all the personality. There's no place. I mean, you put the personality of social history, but you only have a couple of places to put, you can put maybe a sentence in there. And so, how is Kaiser handling this? To me, it's really a tragedy about the way where technology is interfacing with modern medicine.
Yeah. Well, first, Kaiser's had it for a number of years now, and so we've been working through a number of the glitches and trying to develop more. So let me say I love the electronic medical record for a number of reasons. It's really nice when I get called for a case and it's 11 o'clock at night. I can turn on my computer at home and pull up the record right there through our secure VPN. So it's nice. I don't have to go to the hospital and page through the paper chart. I can print out what I need. I can find, and it's all there. Years, even decades of medical history is all there. I was telling someone earlier, I go to the medical record and I read the H&P first for a patient admission to get a sense of why is the patient in the hospital, what's going on, to start the story. But then when I actually want the narrative elements, I go to the social work notes, I go to the case manager notes. Rarely do I find them in the physician notes. I found there's often not even documentation of what happened in a family meeting, except maybe for an agreement to change a code status order or change a treatment plan. So I'm not getting those elements of the story, so we're working on that. And end-of-life stories are very important, advanced care planning stories. We've actually, within Kaiser Southern California, just created a whole separate tab just to collect that information. Surrogate information, advanced directives, POLST forms, because we have POLST in California, whether the patient's in a palliative care hospice program, blood product usage information, all there in one place. So all that stuff that's stuck in progress notes that you can't ever find, all can accumulate there. Now, we've just rolled it out, so I'm not sure how it's going to look yet. But so that's one place we're able to tell more of the story. And there are comment boxes in each of those sections. Where I look in the medical record, in the patient, in the physician encounter, is down at the bottom, where they summarize what they're going to do. That subjective part. And that's where I can start piecing together the story. But I agree, it is not a good tool for storytelling, so I go around. And I don't know how to address that. And I wish I had a better answer for what Kaiser's doing. They've developed a lot more smart phrases to insert things, but the more you template it, the less personal it becomes.
Right.
Over here. Thanks for coming on. That was an excellent piece. Enjoyed every second of it.
Thank you.
It's good to know that the future doctors will be, where they will be thinking about.
At least this group of 299.
In California,
They can't hear you from the other side of the room.
In California, I guess California medical students. Well, I'm an oncologist in practice. I wear a bunch of hats, but my day job is to practice medicine in oncology. And we believe strongly in the relationship business. And you mentioned that relationship is what keeps the physicians in practice and patients coming back to the physician. But medicine has evolved today into a fact, which you mentioned, the restitution 38%, to a point where we're either mechanics or fix the problem, move on, or what we call shift workers, come in and fix the bill and move on. So, did any of these medical students express interest in asking the patients, their lives, their pets, the names, or the schedules? I'm curious to know that some of the Kaiser doctors do appreciate that.
Yes.
Which is good.
Yes.
Did you get that on your secondary interview with these students, whether they would want to go down the road of relationships?
And the fun thing about teaching in medical school is you get to teach lots of classes. So this was one of the classes I taught. I did another class on values histories. And I actually made the students go out and do that. And they had to do 3 things. They had to first pick a patient and then predict what they thought that patient was going to say. And yes, I know that was always fun. And then they had to actually respond to the values histories questions themselves, so I could get a sense of who the student was and how they might interpret the patient responses, and that might also explain why they were making the predictions they were making about the patient they had chosen. And then they had to actually go and interview that patient. And I gave them permission to say, you know, I'm here to do this assignment. Will you help me? Is it okay? So they didn't have to work it into their medical interview. And so then they would actually interview the patient and get the actual responses. And then they had to turn all 3 of those into me. So it was always fascinating to see the difference between what they predicted and what the patients actually said, and then the interplay of their own values. So a lot of them learned, one, about their own biases and judgments, and a lot of them also learned how fascinating patients really are. Isn't that amazing? They're human beings with their own stories, their own experiences, and they might have something to teach you that might not be about medicine. And they enjoyed that, much to their surprise, and sometimes to their chagrin, because that would make it take more time. And what they started to recognize was, this makes it so much more interesting. So he's not just the 86-year-old guy with COPD. He's the 86-year-old guy who fought in World War II and flew planes and lived in Germany. And isn't this amazing? Yeah, people are amazing. We all have these experiences that we can share. And to contextualize your patient that way, the students really liked it. The problem was then they would go on rounds, you know, the resident would send them to get the patient's history, and they'd come back with all this interesting information, and the resident would say, we don't have time for that. So a hidden curriculum sometimes worked against me, but the students really enjoyed doing that. So yes, a lot of them said to me, you know, this was some of the resistance. When I get out of here, or the witnessing, when I get out of here, I'm going to interview patients the way I want to. And I know some of them did, because some of them have come to Kaiser, and they're doctors who work with me now. And when they call me with an ethics consult, I actually get the whole story. I don't just get the medical details and the fact that the potassium's out of whack. I get that, well, she has 3 sisters and 2 children, and daughter number 2 is fighting with sister number 3 about what to do with her. And here's why, because they have this tension that goes, you know, these doctors actually have asked. And I find that tremendously heartening since they were my students. Maybe they were just like that, or maybe they paid attention.
I have the fun of being a medical student in this lifelong process. I graduated in 1947.
Well, happy graduation.
I'd like to express appreciation for what you've described for us today. And I would like to suggest we cast it in a much larger context. Because you're describing the professionalization, the maturation of fine young people. They happen to be in a profession that many of us think is still worthwhile. But their colleagues are doing exactly the same thing. They're going through the same kind of who am I, where am I going, what's it all about, Alfie. I think also we have to look at the context in terms of the models they see. And the models they see in our general society are, to be polite, despicable. So they have that issue to contend with. I would hope that we could take out of what you've helped us think about the much larger question of where are we going in our larger society. Why is it that many physicians have to move patients through every 5 minutes? If you're on the university service, as I've been for a long time, there are urgencies, there are time limitations on rounds. My final comment is to ask whether or not you happen to be familiar with the UMKC School of Medicine's 6-year program and the docent system of care and education.
I've heard a little about the 6-year program today. And I know there were 3 in the country.
Well, the last time I counted, there were 26 and some variants. We're the first one. The only point I want to make here is not that we're unique, but that if medical education could so structure itself that you have true learner, professional, multidisciplinary teams, the sorts of things that you're describing become normal for us. And as a docent working with a group of 12 students, 3 from each of the last 4 years, and working with them for 4 years, there's a very powerful mechanism to try to help you do what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. You know, medicine, the study of medicine used to be an apprenticeship. And we've so professionalized and routinized and technologicalized the practice of medicine, the learning of medicine, that you don't get a lot of that individual character anymore. And you know, there are good role models and bad role models, so there are downsides to that kind of model. But I think, generally speaking, if we can match students with mentors, the way we do in graduate school, that we would go a long way toward correcting some of these issues when they can see the interpersonal relationship. Because that's part of the problem with medical education. The students, some of these conversations do happen, and these relationships do develop, but the students don't see it because they're not invited into that private context. They're not there for that intense informed consent discussion. They're not there at the medical office when the physician and patient are really talking through the physical exam. They're there in the hospital setting primarily, and so they're seeing the quick, get them in, figure out what's wrong, and fix them and get them out. And I think it colors the way they think medicine is practiced, because a lot of that wonderful nuance that does exist is lost. Because there are fantastic physicians out there. There are people, I'm sure each of you maybe has a physician who you swear by, who you would never leave, and are praying he doesn't retire while you still need him. So there are those doctors out there, but it's not how we teach. And I'd like to see us move more in that direction.
A couple months ago, I heard a talk by Dr. Provenzano out of Ohio about some of the strains and stresses and pulls with new physicians. And one of the 2 concerns, one question would be about the sex role differences of the physicians coming out and some of the strains on them between male and female doctors coming out, and also the issue of corporate structure, that the influence of that on how people practice or how they're pulled in different directions. So just my comment to maybe expand that whole concept of looking at how healthcare is being delivered, and some of the strains and stresses that we're all under, which is about the buck, basically. But
yeah, there's some interesting trends in the medical world. Medical students, physicians are increasingly becoming female, and the salaries for physicians are increasingly declining. So I'm not sure about the correlation there. If there's a cause and effect, but there is definitely a relationship. I'm not quite sure what that means. There are certainly gender differences, but a lot of those are stereotypes, and I think sometimes when you go through some of the medical education, some of those gender differences go away because the socialization is different. So that we socialize them into the role of physician, not into the role of female or male physician. I think people who come in with strong personality characteristics, or that strong sense of compassion, strong sense of need for a relationship, it's hard to drive that out of them, even if we try. And so they hold on to it, and that's the way they practice medicine. Other people come in and they're so technically focused, they're bookworms without a lot of life experience, and it's easy to socialize them into this technician role. They know a lot, and I hear people struggling with that. Do I want the surgeon who's the best at what he does, or do I want the nice guy? Why do you have to choose? But unfortunately, that's the case. And I think some of the corporate infrastructure, or the way medicine is structured right now, has something to do with that. There's so much pressure for access, and for increased quality, and for patient safety. We get caught up in all of these things that we have to do, and we forget that there's a real person sitting there in the room who needs attention, because we're busy trying to check off all the initiatives we have to follow and ask all the questions we're supposed to ask in that 10-minute office visit, and then we still have to chart on it before we see the next patient, to get our 4 or 6 patients through every hour. So that really does limit the opportunities there. But I also think that it doesn't take long to make a connection. I'm sure you all have been at a dinner or at a party or in a class, and you've had a really brief conversation with someone and you feel really connected to them. You want to get to know them better. You want to learn more about them. You feel like they're already your friend. And I think that can happen in a clinical encounter too. We just have to figure out how. What are your triggers? And that's something each clinician has to do. So those corporate structures, I think, are going to change. And we already see this big movement toward concierge medicine. And I know there's a lot of derision, a lot of criticism for the doctors who do that. A lot of claims that they're just out for the money. But I think often they're out for the relationship. They want to serve people. They want to have more relationship. They want to be the kind of doctor who goes to this person's home and has time to do that, has time to spend an hour with the patient. And most of the time, they can't. I remember when I was pregnant and I was waiting for one of my routine checkups. And my husband usually came with me, but this day he was particularly tense because he had to get back to the office for a meeting. So we're waiting, and Kaiser was actually really good about wait times. I never had to wait usually more than 15 minutes to get in to see my doctor. But this day we're waiting, and he's looking at his watch, and we're waiting. And I go up and ask the front desk, how much longer are you going to be? How behind is he? And I said, well, he wasn't behind before, I don't know what's going on. So they finally sent someone back, and someone came out and said, we're not sure how long it's going to be. Do you want to reschedule? I was like, I'm already here. I told my husband, if you need to go, go. I was like, I can't leave you. So he stayed. He called and postponed his appointment. We finally go in, and as I walked back, I saw a woman standing in the doorway of one of the patient rooms that clearly had been crying. Now, I don't know what happened. Now, this is my OBGYN, so had she just lost a pregnancy? Was she just diagnosed with cervical cancer? What happened? But my doctor took the time that she needed. And despite the fact that my appointment was supposed to be an hour ago, it made me really happy to know that he took the time that this patient needed, because I knew that if I needed him, he would be there for me too. So that's what I want to see, despite the corporate structure, despite their requirements for access, despite all that they have to get done, it still is possible. And I'll tell you, I'll never leave my OBGYN. You better not retire before I die.
Felicia, I was just going to comment, frankly, given what Gordon shared. You know, there's this timeless debate about is medicine an art or a science? And for a period of time, we bought into that it is a science, and all of the pressure around evidence-based medicine and outcomes. And I think that people are in very high places are beginning to worry about the direction that we're moving in. We are in conversation now with a team at HHS that are looking at some of these issues. And I was so encouraged by a discussion the other day, because rather than looking at various levels and those kind of quantitative measures, which we like so much in medicine, you're thinking about a new unit of analysis. And they're thinking about reflection of patients and asking for, rather than patient satisfaction scores, but saying what was meaningful about this encounter. What was it in this encounter between you and the provider that actually helped you? Not necessarily changed your scores, but maybe impacted your life. And they're playing with that, and we're talking with that, and I think that's exciting. We also are in conversation with a number of HIT companies now, health information technology companies, about actually creating patient portals into the electronic medical record so that the patient can put their own information in that. And then hopefully, when the clinician comes in, he or she has had the opportunity to look at that as well as those quantifiable measurements. So I think we're in a major transition. It's easy to think, oh God, ain't it awful? But I want to believe that with all the major transition, there are also huge opportunities for us to do it differently.
Yeah. I actually don't think it's awful right now. I think think most of the time it works okay. I think it could work better. And I'd like to have more of a relationship with some of the physicians I encounter. But most of the time it's at least adequate for what we need. But it could be a lot better, and I think we need to reform our system so that it becomes possible for it to be better. But rather than a struggle to do these things, that we create a system where this is the norm. And that's going to require a lot of restructuring. And given budget issues, it may be really difficult because, you know, the more access, it's financially driven. And for a lot of good reasons. So balancing all these things is hard. But I think we can do better most of the time. And I really like that idea of changing the way we evaluate our physicians. You know, Kaiser loves surveys. So every time a patient sees a physician, you know, they randomly put you into a pool and you may get a survey. So they survey at least 50% of the people who that physician sees. So I get these surveys all the time. And it's this, you know, Scantron report. And I'm filling in 1 through 10, were your needs met, did the receptionist smile at you? And it's not helpful. And because I know how the physicians work and I know the percentage of things they have to get back, I always fill them out. But I don't understand how they're helpful. So if I could actually provide that feedback, there's not even a space on this form for writing comments. So if I really want to praise a physician, all I can do is just give him 10s. I can't explain why he was so great. And that would be much more satisfying to me, and I think probably satisfying to the physician. And if I didn't think he was great, I'm going to be able to say why. You know, what could he do better? And maybe it's the teacher in me, but I can't help but think that would be helpful. And maybe it's not if you're receiving thousands of these every month, but I can't help but think it would be more helpful and satisfying to the physicians too.